a regular basis, not across a Zoom call. So I think there's benefits of how we work. There's greater time not spent travelling to the office for a lot of the team, but I think there's a lot of negatives as well, because you do not get that cross-office discussion, immediacy of intelligence conversation, which I think is very beneficial for any organisation.
And do you think, to combat that, or I guess the downsides of the current situation, how do you see the way that your work change, or will it go back to business as usual?
If I had my way, I would have everybody back in the office, not on a 5-day-a-week basis, but I'd have them back in on a more regular basis. So it may be that we have the team together half the time, and then the rest of the time everyone can get on and do what they need to do, and they can do it either in the office or away from the office. I don't really think that matters. So I think the times of people coming in at 8:30 and going at 5:30 or 6 o'clock have gone, because I think that's really archaic. And we all know that there's plenty of people who come in early, leave late, but they don't necessarily do a job during the day. They're just a bottom on a seat being seen to be in the office place. And I think what people want, which is what we want, is we want demonstration of productivity. Are you actually doing your job? Whether you're sat at a desk or sat at home, it is irrelevant. It is, are you actually being productive, and are you contributing to the profit economic viability of the company?
Okay. Ben?
Sorry, I was just going to say, one of the other things, as well as the sort of collaboration side, particularly on a sort of business like ours, where we've got, a real wide demographic of ages and sort of people in stages in their career, that sort of tacit learning from your colleagues and overhearing things in the office certainly can't be replicated virtually. So just like there's the whole debate about the longer kids are out of school is going to affect their learning in the early stages. It's the same with those in the early stages of their career as well, in terms of all those things that they can absorb from their colleagues, not just sort of older members of staff, but their peers, and those discussions that just don't take place because you're not in the office. And therefore agree with that. And also the fact that we are sort of a multi-officed, one of the plus sides is having a number of offices. We are one collective business, but it's really improved sort of a complete team, an overall team collective approach now, because people are less sort of cognizant of this person's in London, this person's in Kuala Lumpur, etc. Everyone's in the virtual world, and so in one sense that's brought our team closer together in one sense, even though we're physically further apart, if that makes sense. So that is one positive that's come out of that, but then there are other elements.
I agree about the learning. However, what I noticed, and I'm sure we've all noticed, I'm of an age where, you go out and you actually meet people, you talk to people, you're on the phone a lot. There's a lot of, if you want to call them millennials, there's a lot of younger people coming forward who don't even talk to people. So people will do transactions, say from an agency point of view, and it's all by email. Well, how did you get the deal? Well, I got it from email. There's a generation coming through, they deal with things in a different way to older generations, and therefore once upon a time learning or picking up information was done in a certain way. I think the way that happens is going to change. So like school learning, you have your children could learn, and they're putting it into place in Scotland, in the outer, in the regions where, as long as you've got internet, and that's what's key, internet, is you can all sit on your iPads, you have this collective school discussion, and you go away and you do what you do. And it may be that there are more tutorials that are sent out to people. So once upon a time, people would say to me, CPD, and you'd laugh and say, oh, I've read the Estates Gazette this week. There's maybe going to be more interactive CPD to make sure that people are actually learning what they have to learn. So maybe learning is going to change, because it's got to change in order for people to have that interactive learning that they would have done by sitting with peers. So I think the whole way of learning and then development, etc., is going to have to change as well.
I guess
agreed.
We kind of, in talking about that, in talking about the online element of working now, and how do you think that will affect, and this is a question to the group, how do you think that will affect the office, the actual real estate that we currently work in, or we're supposed to be working in at the moment? I know that's quite a wide question, and I guess
I was going quiet because I was waiting for somebody else to say something. I think go back to just what I was saying before. The internet the internet is becoming absolutely critical. So in terms of what we were talking about before, Jake, about, you know, the marketplace is going to become more international, and therefore for companies to function, they're going to want to, so where did people choose to have their locations previously? They'd maybe go to city centres. Where were their areas of operation that they needed? Where did they employ people? Well, let's have our base here because that's where we employ our people. If you're employing people on an international basis, your determining factor is going to be strength of internet. And Britain does not have the best internet infrastructure. Germany, Europe are far better than us. And therefore, we have really got to pull our socks up if we want to compete on an international basis in terms of the labour pool. So that really throws it open. So in terms of that working as we do at the moment, I'm sure there's a lot of people who will say they've had a good experience from working from home because they've got a good internet connection. If you've got a poor internet connection, your home value is probably going to reduce down, and people are going to move because they cannot get a good infrastructure connection, you know, internet connection. So the sort of hub of offices, yes, you will have hubs, and there's a push to, as opposed to having these super hubs like we're developing for HMRC in Nottingham, there will be smaller hubs around the regions maybe, where people can have drop-off places where they can go in and have more immediate places to go to. So as opposed to people travelling to a super hub, you'll have smaller groups of offices, but those smaller groups of offices could be anywhere around the world. So to me, internet is absolutely key, as well as having a good skill base, but that skill base now is international.
That's really interesting you say about the smaller hubs, and please excuse me if this is untoward, but the HMRC building that you're building was a kind of the opposite direction to having smaller hubs all over. It was kind of condensing that into a larger footplate, a more efficient footplate, and having it in a larger city where there's easier access to facilities. But now are we looking to go the opposite way again, or revert back to smaller hubs in more local areas?
I think you probably get a mix in that the push for HMRC and government to have the super hubs, which are located, there's 13 of them around the UK. The push for that was because government had a whole series of archaic property which was under the old PFI model, which was not at all good for government. So what government said was, right, we've got this property, it's not good financially. Does it actually provide us with what we want? No. We've got all this property all over the place. Some of them we've got a small old building which is not fit for purpose. So the government's drive was economic. They also recognised that if they wanted to keep pace with the market, they had to provide office buildings which were going to be attractive to attract the best labour, because government want to be able to attract really good labour. They pay well, but they wanted to, you know, sort of jazz up their offer. And, you know, with knowledge of the different activities and the people who are going to be employed in the HMRC building in Nottingham, it's a fantastic offer. So the government have to offer better facilities to attract, and I think that's what a lot of companies are doing now. They want to attract the best labour pool, and therefore how do you do it? You have people want to be in cities, you offer a very good property. So what HMRC did in Nottingham, that was the sweep up for masses of property around the region, and so that doesn't only house the existing jobs in Nottingham, which are 2,400, that's going to be 4,200 jobs, because they're mopping up all the residual of space elsewhere. So it is the right reason, and what HMRC have got to look at now is just how that building operates. But one of the interesting factors is that building location was driven because they wanted to be near to the station. You may well have heard that Schroders are saying that they have got no plans, and they're telling all their staff to work from home. And what Schroders are actually saying now is if you come into the office or if you use public transport, you've got to quarantine for 14 days. So that public transport, which was seen as the big driver, and to be near to public transport for hubs or for a lot of companies, is now a bit of a negative until such time as we are able to get a vaccine for COVID-19. So what we've got to just remember is COVID-19 impacts us now, but come getting a vaccine which we're comfortable with, things may well change. So we're talking to a company who are not put off by that, and they want to be near to the station in Nottingham because they are looking post-COVID. So what we've got to just put into perspective is COVID is a blip, it's a major blip, and hopefully we will get past it. So we shouldn't all react and go, COVID-19, let's just change everything forever. There is structural change, but things will at some point settle down to what a new norm is, but the new norm is not going to be as it was pre-COVID.
Yeah.
Will that affect the sort of? I think that will probably affect the facilities that are in the short term potentially that are brought into the building. There's always been a big push towards cycling, running, etc. to work. Will that not just further enhance that? And therefore, if you're developing a one-off building, the amount of cycling provision, changing, etc., will be enhanced. But then if you're developing a campus, you maybe even have sort of wider cycle hubs, health and wellbeing hubs, and the ability for people to effectively avoid public transport as best they can to sort of get around those, or almost change people's mentality of how they get to work and avoid that public transport situation, as you say, which will then potentially have a knock-on effect to yourselves as a developer in terms of the amount of space of that type of facility you've got to provide in your building.
But it's also, I mean, what's going on at the moment is major structural change, not just in terms of offices, it's retail, it's residential, so the government are trying to push. Everybody knows that we haven't got enough residential being provided in the right locations, and how do we do it? And that's where, to me, there's opportunity at the moment for major structural change to how our city centres work. So look at Broadmarsh. Broadmarsh was a retail facility. Retail's massively changed. It's never going to go back to how it was. So Broadmarsh in Nottingham offers a major opportunity to actually get more residential into the city. And we've got to change. So you may well have people that, yeah, we're happy to live in the city and we'll walk to work because we don't need public transport. You'll then have people say, well, actually, I want to live outside of the city and I'll just go into the office 2 days a week. And there'll be rotas as to how people go into the office. And they may not necessarily use public transport. They may use some other form of transport, whatever it is, who knows. And therefore, it's just, it's sort of sitting back, as opposed to doing a quick reaction to it in saying, right, okay, what does the structural economy need to actually take it forward? We need housing, we need retail, but not as much in the city centres maybe. We've got to have more activity in the city centres. What do we actually do there? So yes, in terms of the transport's got to change, but it's also looking at what are the needs, of the sort of the wider physical economy. And we've all heard about, restaurants and bars, etc., struggling in city centres because London, somewhere like Canary Wharf, is an absolute ghost town. And therefore, those users maybe have got to go somewhere else. So there's big structural change happening across all sectors, and that massively impacts on city centres and transport.
Ben, just going back to your point about changing the facilities that you have to offer in an office, and this, I'm going to start asking, just so we're not just talking between the three of us, I'm going to start asking other people in the group. Does anyone see the, improved facilities that we need to offer now? For example, showers, lockers, bike storage, kit storage, all those kind of things. And then also on top of that, better natural ventilation, more space, better areas for people to feel more comfortable. And as much as you said, Rachel, COVID is a blip, it is a blip, but it will take far, far longer for people's perceptions to change of what's actually safe. And therefore offices will need to offer a far more secure feeling to the people that are going to go back in which will in turn affect recruitment and who wants to work for a business that works in a cruddy office. They'll go to somewhere else. Will that then affect the rents that we have to pay, and therefore the buildings we have to build, and therefore the rents we have to pay? And will it then mean that there is a stock of offices that 2, 3 years or 5 years ago were just about usable are now completely useless and people won't want to rent in there? I guess, John, what do you think?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, I think definitely we're seeing a change in terms of what people are wanting from their offices. I think we've definitely seen a huge change in parking requirements. It's been very interesting. I know when Ben started on HSBC, they had a huge office car park requirement, and that reduced right down to like single figures. And now in terms of, the driver for choosing office location, I think Rachel said, isn't just based on the net to gross, the column grid, the daylight. It's everything else you get around that office as well. It's all the facilities of the bars, the restaurants, the culture, the nighttime, all of that. And I think everything doesn't have to be in the building. It's not your building now, offices are out on kind of office parks. It's actually the facilities they're getting in towns and city centres being really important. And I think from our perspective, I see it'll be far easier for us. Our Nottingham office has opened far more quickly than our London office, exact to Rachel's point in terms of public transport, because most of the people at our London office travel on public transport, whereas our Nottingham team kind of walk or cycle to get there. In Sydney, our team can all walk to the office. In Kuala Lumpur, they all travel on public transport. So I think that's going to be a major piece for it as well. But I think when we're then seeing the facilities, when you get to the office for 1 or 2 days a week, I see it is going to totally change now as well. And I think that goes to desk densities. I know you made the point about the size of HMRC buildings. I think you will see businesses that want to move to smaller hub offices in lots of locations they can go and drop into. But actually, I think if employees go and visit an office and the desks are all 1,600 desks all crammed in, and I sit within sneezing distance of 20 people, or I go to a bigger office with big floor plates like Sladen are delivering, and there's more generosity of space around, and then actually I see that as an employer being more generous, and I'm more likely to take the job as an employee. So when there's this two-side debate of offices are all going to get really small because we have 25% of people in every day, or actually generosity of space will be the thing that makes you look like a good employer to an employee, and therefore big floor plates and strong new ventilation systems will be the important thing. And that's the bit we're finding, I know when Ben and I have been debating, incredibly interesting in the market as that's changing.
And also provision of outdoor space for employees as well, not just what is the internal environment you're working in. When you go out for lunch, yes, you can enjoy the city centre, but have you got a bit of semi-private space as a business to actually enjoy that? Where we are at the minute, we've got a great roof to the building, but we can't really use it as an outdoor space. It'd be a great space to have, and trying to bring that, as much of those other elements into it. Also probably a greater drive to introduce a lot more greenery and biophilic design within the workplace as well, to try and again just enhance that feeling of nature and well-being, reinforce that as well.
But I think that use of space is going to change anyway, because there will not, we for example, I think a lot of companies will not go back to just working 5 days a week sat at a desk. So you are going to have proper hot desking, and talking to a lot of companies down in London, they're shutting down offices. They've taken advantage of lockdown, and they are completely changing the way their offices work. And you have to book in for it. You have to book in. Teams have to book in. So it is fundamentally going to change, and therefore, you're absolutely right, John. It's generosity of space, and therefore, will office requirements change? People may still keep the amount of space they have, and then in terms of the rents paid, it's going to go down to supply and demand. Does a landlord want somebody? No. Where are you in respect to those locations where there's supply and demand? And it's just going to go back to old supply and demand as to what rent's going to be paid, and also whether you've got a building which is fit for purpose. So a lot of those older buildings without the right facilities, they're going to have to, and this is where it throws up opportunity. You've got to change your product. So, product development happens because things change in the economy. So, our whether it's offices or retail or whatever, it's like any product. You've got to keep up to date with what the market wants. And if you don't get your product, you know, nobody wants your product, and you don't get your rent no matter what you're offering. So people have got to keep up to date with what's going on. The problem there is when you've got some of these lovely old buildings and they don't necessarily work in the right way for organisations, but people still want nice, characterful buildings.
Yeah.
I guess on that point then, in terms of some offices won't be fit for purpose, and considering, I guess, the current changes in planning regulations, that it's far easier now to convert office into residential. I personally fear that there will be a sudden influx of very, very poor quality residential in cities, of substandard office being repurposed.
But why should it necessarily become substandard residential when you've got standards that have to be introduced, and the planning authority is there to make sure that you know, it shouldn't happen?
And also,
go on, sorry, Ben.
Sorry, picking up on the point about supply and demand as well, in terms of if the quality of that residential space isn't good enough, people just will not take it up, and therefore you've got to move with the times in terms of lots of people are seeing lockdown, working from home. Do I want to be shut in the smallest space standard residential offering because I'm working from home? They're not going to want to, so therefore that's going to balance the market in terms of providing those that can see the opportunity to provide a better environment within that, with those extra things that people need and want, are going to be the ones leading the way.
I think also, one of the points is financial resilience. You know, what we're seeing at the moment is not reality. Come October, November, that's when reality is going to hit, when people are off furlough. You know, what's government going to do with the business schemes? So in terms of employees choosing as to where they want to go to for work, there's a big unemployment cloud hanging out there, and therefore there's going to be a large skill base who are going to be made redundant. So you look at AECOM, who, you know, an international organisation, they are making thousands redundant. So people who are good are going to lose their jobs. This is not just getting rid of the, you know, people who they don't want. So, you know, we were talking about artificial intelligence. There's all sorts of things that are going to happen which are going to lead to good people being made redundant. So I would suggest there's going to be people out there who will compromise and say, fine, I need a job and I will take this job in an environment which might not be ideal, but I need a job, so I will do this job. You will then have other people who have got a fantastic skills base and they can be choosy. So I think you will just have people who've got poor skills, and that's where government have got to step in to make sure they've got those right skills. People who have got some skill, but they're going to have to compromise to get a job. And then you've got people who've got fantastic skill and they will be able to choose in the marketplace. You know, so that is also going to kick in later this year in terms of, you know, reality, because we are not sat in reality at the moment.
I do agree with that, that kind of idea, but when we're talking about the office of the future isn't going to be built for another 5 years, and therefore what we're talking about now and the new offices that we're going to kind of dream up this week or next week, the recruitment market will have picked back up. We won't be in a recession. We'll be back on an upswing. And therefore, it might be that we have to consider that these buildings have to do far more to get that recruitment base, or get that staff base.
They have, but we've also got to look at, in 5 years' time, what are the jobs going to be available in 5 years' time? I know that the problems, say, like you take on, God, I'm trying to, is it in terms of HSC? That in terms of when they were bringing that forward, I remember going to a seminar for it, and that was about 3 years ago. They said this is going to be operational for 10, 15 years. We are trying to plan for something now, and we don't know what jobs are going to be required for that when it's operational. And that's the dilemma that you've got. So you're trying to plan for offices. So we all come up with our offices and we want to have maximum floor plates that are nice, open area, you know, et cetera, and I don't think those office areas are necessarily going to change. What we do not know is what jobs are going to go into those offices, because we just haven't got a clue. you know, and that is the big structural change. So yes, our city centres will continue to be a mix of buildings. What goes on in those buildings, I think, needs to be more fluid. So it's mixing uses within spaces, and the space has got to be more dynamic. So at the moment, we plan a retail unit, we plan an office building, we plan a we plan residential. There maybe needs to be a little bit more fluidity between how we design these spaces, so that from an institutional or an investment point of view, they can protect even more so what's going to happen. So I'm not saying, you know, when you design your offices, you've got to make sure they can switch to residential. But I think over time, there will be more fluidity, because we just haven't got certainty as to, in 10 years' time, my children are coming out of university. Once upon a time when I came out of university, I knew which career path I was going down. Now things are completely changing. In 10 years' time, who knows what jobs are going to be available for people coming forward. So yes, we've got to plan for offices, but what's going to go into those offices? That's the challenge.
That's a really nice segue also into discuss. I guess I'd like to take the conversation down the more mixed-use development, and therefore, we have kind of talked about the office as being a box with lots of people that are working. But now, in my opinion, and what we're seeing, a lot of the projects we're working on at Leonard Design for anyway, is buildings are no longer single use. They are mixed use developments. They have lots of uses. They're completely fluid. Well, not completely fluid. That would be impossible. But they're more fluid in the uses that they can use, and they look towards the future to almost be able to adapt to different uses on all sorts of different sectors. So office can be floor plates. I guess we're going back to a large floor plate, but that can be changed for different uses, or retail can be repurposed as leisure or food and beverage, or to whatever the market requires at that time. I haven't really asked a question there. I just made a statement. Sorry.
No, you're right. But the difficulty is what you've got to take into consideration. So, for example, say you had an office building and you want to try and have a bit of flexibility to sort of say, okay, well, I want to maybe change this to residential in however many years. It's your means of escape, you know, so they're very different between the two. And so it's quite difficult. So it's coming up with that clever design to allow for that flexibility, and, you know, I'm sure it will happen. I mean, there are buildings where, you know, you've got stacked buildings in the city centres where, you know, you've got offices and maybe hotel, and then you maybe got residential, you know, those. And once upon a time, that would never have happened, because an institution would have said, I'm not having that, you know. So those changes are happening in terms of stacking uses. You know, we already know that distribution, you might get a Travis Perkins at ground floor, and then you might have residential above, and that's happening down in London. You know, there's all sorts of multi-stacking happening already, because, you know, the other issue we've got is we haven't got a lot of land. And as retail takes on, we are looking more towards warehouses like the Amazon we're building. It's got a 570,000 square foot footprint, but it's on 4 levels, you know. So those they're changing because we've got a reduction, you know, we haven't got as much land, and that's why you are seeing, so for example, Manchester, there's massive towers going up, because that's the only way you can get the, you know, the viability for, you know, schemes. And that's where you're getting that stacking of those different uses. And there's no reason why those different uses can't have more fluidity of space. I mean, you look at WeWorks, you go in those buildings, they're work buildings, but you could see them working in all sorts of different ways, you know.
Absolutely. Ash, this would be an interesting question for you. As we're seeing potentially more uses or higher requirements for things like M&E or ventilation and things, are you seeing changes in that? Are you seeing now an immediate change in people's requirements for those buildings?
We're not seeing an immediate change at the moment. Clients are asking about it and mentioning it. And, you know, a good example is where HMRC is designed with sealed windows. A lot of clients, you know, on new designs now are asking if the windows could be openable. So there's a little bit of a discussion about how those costs would affect this sort of overall development, and just we talked a lot about flexibility and making the buildings as flexible as possible. I think from an M&E point of view, where we see this stepping forward is a lot more heat distribution networks, which provides flexibility. So you won't have necessarily gas, electric, water coming into each individual building. Each individual building might have its own heat network, and then you can start doing load profile sharing. So if one building needs cooling and one building needs heating, potentially you can transfer the heat from one to the other, and you can flip those buildings over very quickly. So if you did want to flip an office building into a residential building, if you've got a central district network providing those two, a range of buildings in a small area, then you can flip those buildings over a lot easier. So I think that there are a few changes coming in terms of the services. We've just got to make sure that we're on top of those and leading the way rather than dragging our heels behind you guys who are talking about making all these changes. We've got to make sure that we're keeping up with you.
And how would that sharing work between different ownerships of buildings? Because it'd be very nice if one person owned a mixed-use development and all the buildings could share heat and electric and all that kind of stuff. But if there is five different owners,
on a single district heat network, you can meter each building. So how this works, it's an ambient temperature network. So the network might run at sort of 30 degrees or something like that. So you can use that 30 degrees to generate cooling, and you can use that 30 degrees to generate heating. If you've got 50% cooling and 50% heating, you don't have to put any power really into that network. So in that scenario, it would be shared really easily. But the more buildings you've got on a network like that, an ambient loop network, the more efficient the network starts to become. And the more flexibility you've got as well, because you don't have to, if you change an office into apartments, you don't have to start thinking about, are you going to put a combi boiler in each apartment? Are you going to put a heat exchanger in each apartment? That's all kind of sorted for you with a network solution. So we think that's a big part of moving forward. Anything you can do to make to enhance flexibility, I think, is going to be our role.
And this might not necessarily be the best question to ask you, Ash, and maybe someone else in the group could. What is the effect on the cost of building the building to put those processes in? And obviously we're all trying to make buildings for not as cheap as possible, but as cost effectively as possible. Would there need to be some sort of legislation that means that it had to be in there for that to be pushed forward?
I'm not sure. I mean, I'll let other people answer the sort of deeper question, but I think there's a lot you can do for not a lot of cost. And open windows is a good example. I'm not sure that adds a make or break difference to developing an office building. The benefits in a crisis like this of having openable windows to boost the ventilation system that you put in are self-evident. So I think there's a lot you can do without having to necessarily put crazy amounts of money into offices. I think with flexibility being the key in an office environment, I think one of the big things that owners are going to have to look at is the value of keeping the same amount of space and making the space work better and be more appealing for their employees. I think that's probably going to be a large cost item. But
I think sorry, can I just say from a cost point of view, I wouldn't necessarily say there's major cost. I mean, there may well be cost. However, what you've got to look at is where does the money come from? And if you want to have an institutional investor who's going to give a maximum yield in order to purchase a property, so say look at HMRC, would HMRC have gone for what Ash has suggested? No, they wouldn't have done, because they wanted independent resilience. Would others look at it? When different sort of specifications get introduced, it's seen that they're proven to work elsewhere. And I think what's got to happen is it's got to be demonstrated that something like that can actually work and it's resilient. And I think the more and more it's introduced and it works, then the institutional market will take it on board. Until such time, it's going to be resisted, unless you've got like a business part where you can actually introduce your own and you actually put it in place, because it's one investor who's actually taking forward that whole structure.
Just Can I just sort of jump in there on the natural ventilation part? Because if we're, offices are located in town or city centres, and you want to push towards openable windows. One, there's the sort of, I think, openable windows may boost the actual system, but also there's a psychological aspect of people in the building having more control and maybe therefore feel more comfortable in terms of being in that environment. Also, on top of that, you've got sort of air quality issues, which might mean that we sort of touched on this beforehand, Rachel, about the greater partnership between private and public sector in terms of, driving sort of wider initiatives around green transport, etc., to improve the air quality within the city centres, and therefore that step change you talked about in the overall city, towns and cities, and that whole infrastructure is vital, and that the local authorities and government have got to keep up with that to help bring all those initiatives forward, and therefore try and drive these different step change in the design of the buildings.
Yeah, the difficulty is if you're in a business park and you can provide an office building which has got a 15-metre, you can have your sort of, you've got a 15-metre depth of building, something like that, that's fine. HMRC, we've got depths of 30 metres, so you have to have you've got to have mechanical ventilation, because not everybody can have the benefit of just being next to a window. So you've also got to come back to what is the actual what is the building you're trying to deliver, and if everyone has to just bring forward buildings that can be naturally ventilated, and I know that's not just with windows, you can do it in other ways, you've also got to look at the viability of the actual plot you're looking to develop. So there's all sorts of factors that have to come into consideration.
Just for clarity, I'm talking about natural ventilation as a boost, as an addition to what you'd normally put in for specifically for this crisis, if that makes sense. So,
but can you imagine everybody trying to scramble? Yeah, everyone's trying to scramble because I want to sit next to the window, because I want to be able to open that window, and Doris sat in the middle is going, close that window, I'm cold. And that is the reason why we have the buildings that we have, because you've got all those issues, and it's one of perception as well, isn't it? I'm sat next to a window, so I'm okay. You're sat in the middle of the building, you're not okay. You're going to catch COVID, and this is
all the desks with windows will get booked up first before.
Absolutely, yeah.
Can I just one question on that? So Maggie is on with us from SOM, who we collaborate with quite a lot, and I think this is very, very relevant in terms of Rachel's work as well. When you look at height of buildings, there's been a big drive to have to build higher buildings to get land value to work in towns and city centres. And obviously, the idea of them working in a tall building, in terms of, go up and down in lifts and logistics of it. I just wonder, Maggie, if you have to answer, just in terms of our SOM seeing any impact in terms of scales of buildings you're looking at? You're on mute, so I can't hear if you are on. No, fine. So I jumped to Anne-Marie then, obviously, as someone who works for EY in a tall building, where you've got thousands of staff going up, into skyscrapers at Canary Wharf or more London. Are you seeing an impact then in terms of people not wanting to go into the office because concerned on the height of the building?
Actually, yeah, absolutely. And that is something that has been discussed, that how long will it take you to actually get to your desk? So quite a practical piece, that will you need to book a time slot to turn up, to go up into a lift? So that's something else that has been sort of talked through. And I think also I've had quite a few questions actually from my team about, do I need to wear a mask? Do I not wear a mask? Can I ask people in my team to wear one? That is something that, what is appropriate. If somebody sort of joins me in a meeting room and I feel uncomfortable, am I okay to say, that's fine, let's sit somewhere else? There's quite a lot of dynamics, I think, going on.
Yeah, and EY have also done a lot of research in that. We've been very lucky to be kind of part of that through Martin and the team, in terms of kind of looking at culturally how the impact of this and going to taller buildings. But taller buildings, obviously, somebody you have to get to those land values that Rachel will know in terms of this work. Maggie, did you manage to unmute then? I don't know if I put you under pressure if you don't want to kind of answer.
Well, while Maggie's unmuting.
Oh, yeah, Maggie's there. She's there, Jake. Maggie, are you there?
Hi, yes, I am. Yes, we've seen a lot of changes in the way that we will approach the office when we do start working. Lifts would have to schedule. We will have like a card where you don't need to touch the lift, so it's the contactless approach as well. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think, you know, for SOM, you know, obviously a lot of your buildings, you know, that we are very, very high, and actually that's a huge shift in kind of impact, you know, but then has a huge impact on values as well. And I guess, Cecilia, a question for you, just in terms of from the RIBA's perspective. Obviously the RIBA are representing architects and kind of, you know, quality of buildings and so forth. Are you under pressure from the members of the RIBA or developers to put forward kind of government papers or advice in terms of, you know, the future, especially with changes in terms of planning?
Yeah, hi John and everyone. Interesting conversation. Yes, I am sitting now in my dining room. So this has been my office since March, 18th of March. So it's not just the change in the city center. There have been, since March, 3 people working in this house from home. Well, so also the house has changed. We have to contract a new internet program for the capacity. Yeah.
And in terms of the RIBA right to having, you know, giving guidance, national guidance as well, are you seeing more of a focus on that in your work?
Yeah, yes, we do, and we are not expecting, because we are in particular the East Midland office, because we are tenant of NTU, you know, the Nottingham Trent University, and at the moment only very indispensable staff have to be on site in NTU, and we are not right. The staff for the university, because we are outsider. So probably we won't be back until January, if not.
Huge impact on the university, isn't it? Yeah.
And the same thing, 66 Portland Place. I think they are looking into come back, but it will be stages, and also, as you said, probably 30% of the members of the staff will be there at one time.
Yeah.
Of circulation guidelines, and people who normally have been commuting, like in my case, I live in Lincoln, and there are a lot of colleagues in London that don't live in London. They commute from cities nearby or outskirts of London. They won't be forced. RIBA is not forcing anyone to be back on his desk. I mean, we have time to prove during all this time that we can carry on doing our work. Yeah,
John, can I just say?
Yeah. Some pieces of work has been the nature of our work. Like I've just been in a discussion about the award, which is being the more Hajj affected program that does. Because it implies all those side visits, you know, the judges, plus the big celebration we are always looking for. It's the highlight of the year for architecture celebration, the East Midland Award evening. It won't happen, which is really sad. Yeah.
Yeah, it's meant to be next week. So Rachel, do you want to bring you back in?
It's just saying, in terms of we've been looking to BCO as to, because we're members of BCO, is right, okay, what are BCO doing and how are BCO reacting? And we've been starting discussions more in terms of, because we just bought 35 acres at Bicester, we're bringing that forward with offices, and therefore Cherwell District Council are very hot on zero carbon. So we've been having to sort of push, right, okay, how do we accommodate this during construction and then actually during operation for when people are in occupation? And so we've been looking to BCO for that. And there's various working groups set up, and we've also been sort of looking to BCO to say, okay, right, what's actually coming forward? And I think working groups are being put up. There's not necessarily a lot of direction. I imagine that's the same for the RIBA at the moment. Everyone's trying to react and just understand the impacts of this. And it's so, I mean, you only have to look at governments as to how they're having to change their decisions. So it's very changeable. We're all going to have to think about this, but I don't think there's anybody at the moment there who's got an answer, whether it's BCO, RIBA, or any other institution, as to what do we do. And I think it's talking groups like this, which is right, okay, how do we react? What have we got to look at it? And it's those people who've got those occupational requirements which will dictate, okay, right, this is what we want from you. So we're looking at one occupier at the moment, and they're not necessarily coming out with anything. Well, there's two I can think of at the moment. Neither of them are coming out with anything majorly different from what has been requested previously. However, one of them is what is now key. Once upon a time, it was just electricity. Now it's strength of internet. Internet is absolutely critical.
And Ben, that was really important for the bank, wasn't it? When we were working with the banks, you know, it was that consistency of it as well. That if your internet went down for a period of time, you just lost so much functionally as well.
It's that overall resilience on all fronts, both, you know, internet, power, etc. It's just that ability to keep on functioning regardless of what happens. And so that overall robustness of the offer is critical, as you say, both in broadband, but also power and other, or, you know, the other elements as well. I think that's key all the way through.
And it may be office. Can I just ask?
Can I just ask a question? It's one burning hole in my head. As Rachel mentioned, that the UK doesn't have the greatest internet in comparison to a lot of other countries. You do wonder, in light of this virus, is HS2 the best use of government money, or should we be investing a little bit more in boosting our internet offering?
That's a dangerous question, Ash.
Controversial.
It's a controversial point of discussion, I think, Jacob.
Yeah, good. Yeah.
I imagine that HS2 was introduced. I mean, we've all got our reasons. To me, HS2 could have been wrapped up as, you know, something else. It was just a means of spending money, government in times, because I think everyone will say is, were we teetering towards a recession? Was there an issue before COVID? Yes, there was. And therefore, government, in times of difficulty, they put their hand in their pocket and they start spending money. So HS2 was right. We need to start spending money on big infrastructure projects. Boris Johnson wants to connect with the North because he wants to protect his vote. And therefore, let's put some money into HS2. It could have been internet. It could have been something else. It was government spending money and being seen to be getting off the fence on a project. So you'll always have that dichotomy of view of, no, we shouldn't have, yes, we should have done. But internet is absolutely key, and I can't imagine that there's not going to be some government initiative. They've already got a government initiative, and I think it's Esther McVeigh, who is the internet minister. She's in charge of internet. I imagine that is going to get a massive push, because they've got, you know, however they do it, they've got to roll that out. So I imagine HS2 will roll, and there will also be other initiatives that come forward, major infrastructure, but infrastructure as we saw it, in terms of whether it's motorway or rail, infrastructure in this country, the critical infrastructure is internet. Absolutely. And they've got to get on with that.
I would say, Ash, as well on that, in some ways, all that HS2 for me is upgrade of a rail line. You know, that's all it is. You know, we have our office in Berlin, and you can travel on a rail network there that is phenomenal. It runs so smooth, the train, and actually there's been a huge lack of investment in the railway. I think the fact that it was called HS2 and it's all about London to Birmingham was the problem. All it is saying is, we've not invested in this infrastructure for so long. We've got to start spending money on it. And for me, definitely the internet, you know, power supply, all that is important. But actually, many other European cities have far better rail infrastructure than our country does. And we do need to pull our steps on that as well.
But John, for the same price as HS2, we could have upgraded every single mile of track in the UK. So at that.
True. Maybe that'd be better use. Fair call, Jake. Our good old debate. Yeah.
But it kind of, I've almost forgotten what last thing I was going to say was, aren't we currently in the middle of trying to upgrade our 5G network? And I don't know.
Yeah, but I think we need to just speed it up, don't we?
Yeah.
We can all talk about doing things, but we've got to get on with it, you know. And we've all got bothered about, you know, should we be using, you know, I can't say the word, Huawei or however you say their name, you know, because we're scared about China taking over this, you know, the intelligence of this country. Wow. We've just got to get on with it, you know, just got to get on with it.
I agree. I just going back to something that Cecilia said, and Ben, I know you've talked to me quite a lot about this, of the home becoming quite a key office to a lot of people. I know you've got quite a lot of thoughts on this. It'd be nice for you to share your thoughts on, I guess, how we're going to change the design of residential to make sure that homes have space to work in.
Absolutely. I mean, having that discussion earlier about the fact that, a lot of people, I'm sat here sort of shoehorned into the corner of one of my, one room in the house with lots of other things going on. And therefore you haven't got necessarily, everyone hasn't that space to work. And, over the last 20, 30 years, it's how many bedrooms can we cram into one particular property of a minimum size and a minimum set of facilities. So not only will this affect the office development, but also how we master plan and design homes in the future, both city centre and, right through to rural. And then one of the other things is working at home, that in terms if we are going in and out of the office for 1 or 2 days, those times when you are at home on your own, if you're not someone like, I have a family, so you interact with other people, but we have people in our office who are single, they live in their own flat, they don't really interact with that many people. So how do you address those other issues of just the normal social things? If people are working from home, will there be more sort of collaborative small scale clubs in residential developments, either sort of rurally or in a suburban situation? So I think those are quite important, and it will affect how those unfold over the next 5 or 10 years.
Actually, yeah, Ben, just picking up on that, I think from an EY perspective, a lot of our projects, I guess we have a lot of graduates that are working on our projects, and we are finding that they are the ones that are so keen to get back into the office, that they don't have the workspace. And a lot of them are sitting in their bedrooms on their beds, and we're trying to set things up for them. They can sort of work remotely somewhere else. But yeah, agree. I think it's something that we are sort of constantly trying to consider how we fix that. And I think that will potentially push getting back into the office.
Yeah.
Those two things, just incidentally, sorry to butt in again, but they're the big problems that as a company, with our office layout, we're not managing to solve at the moment. The first is the office community, and making sure that, as you were talking about, Ben, and you were talking about Anne-Marie, graduates, younger people who live on their own can still interact with that office community. We do all the virtual pubs and stuff, but they feel quite short-lived. But the second is trainees. We usually take 1 to 2 trainees on every year, but we're struggling to find out how to do that this year. And we touched on it again, Ben, earlier, because of that skill share and that knowledge share, and how to make sure that their mentors, if we take an A-level leaver on, is his mentor or her mentor going to be available in the office all the time? And at the moment, they're not. And these are serious problems for us as a business that we've not managed to conclude yet. We're sort of sitting them out at the moment.
Picking up one of the things Rachel said about how we actually use that office space we have, will actually some of the office space almost become a mini sort of broadcasting studio stroke sort of seminar space that you can actually set up those online seminars and have that on as the shift in learning takes place. And therefore actually you're just creating much more different spaces for people to use, and we are going to have to learn in different ways. Rachel said much earlier, and it's just being probably a bit more open-minded and thinking about, all the universities have had to go overnight from, giving lectures to 300 people in a lecture theatre to deliver everything online, breakout rooms, etc. And maybe we just, as businesses, need to be more conversant with those things and seeing how those work. I think there's quite a lot of research done over in China about working from home before all this happened, and one business took a group of sort of young graduates, where half of them were sat in the office doing similar tasks, and half of them were sent home to work home. And in the first, I think, for a 3 or 4 month period, and those at home were generally perceived to be a lot more productive and get through their. I mean, it was more of a task-based initiative, and therefore, but when at the end of the period, when they all came back in and were given the choice to carry on working at home or come back into the office, even though they initially felt happier working out of the office and were more productive, they wanted to come back because a lot of them were either just in a 1-bed apartment by themselves, or they're working in their bedroom because they were still living with their parents. And it was that social nature of individuals that got them back into the office. The fact that they were more productive and could focus better, balanced up against that, us being social animals and conditioned to wanting to be with people, was much more overriding. And they also felt that even though they were more productive and seemed to be more productive, that psychologically they felt that their peers and their bosses were less aware of what they were doing, even though they were being measured to be more productive. And that perception of not being able to be seen to be doing things and being involved was that sort of out of sight, out of mind really played on their their psychology. And so those kind of things are equally, all those softer human things we've talked a lot about, sort of the bricks and mortar, the money side of things, but there's the whole social and psychological side of this, which is going to be equally as important to how our office evolves in the future.
Well,
I suppose that's one of confidence, isn't it? In terms of when you're young and you're not as confident, whereas when you get older and you're more confident, you don't necessarily have to be seen to be sat on your chair doing whatever. However, I'm sat in our boardroom and I've got a whacking great screen. You've got a screen sat behind you, Jake. What's to say? And I'm just thinking about this now. I like to be able to see my team, not because I don't trust them. At the end of the day, they've got to get on and do their job. And if they don't do the job, they don't have a job to do, and therefore I've got a screen here. What's to say that twice a week, on a Monday and a Wednesday, I say, right, team, everyone's going to have their screen on behind them and you're going to be able to see the whole team working. So everyone's working wherever they're working. And I might send, the software's there that I send a message to, whoever, and I say, can we just have a chat about this? But that message flashes up for everybody. So if anybody wants to be part of that conversation, anybody can then join in that conversation. So basically you've got everybody as if you're in an office, but they're on a screen. Everyone's working away. I can see that, X, Y, Z are there. Just want to talk to you about such and such. So why not have that? So you can see everybody. Yeah, okay, you're not there together, but it's what we were saying before. We've got to think of different ways of how we do things. It's not, I want everybody back in the office. We've got to think of different ways, So I'm actually thinking now, right, okay, I'm going to get everybody sat at home, proper screen that we can all see each other, and we'll maybe have 2 days working like that. So no, it's not exactly the same, but it's a different way of doing things.
Yeah.
I was saying, Rachel, I won't be able to work in my pajamas anymore.
Well, maybe not. No, but we've just got to, we've just got to look at different ways of doing things.
I was picking up on something that Anne-Marie said about the different ways we'd have meetings, and potentially, just in my head, that would be the most stressful place to be in the office, when there's 10 different people that have then seen hundreds of different people all weekend, potentially bringing that virus into a room. Do we want to actually not have meetings, but carry on with our business as usual in the office? I before this conversation would have thought, no, we'll go into the office to have the meetings to see everyone. But now thinking about it, that's probably not the place I would want to do it. I'd rather do a meeting over Zoom, because you get everything done really quickly and really efficiently, and then maybe go back into the office to do some of your day-to-day. I mean, I definitely miss my daily catch-up with Ben talking about the football since we've been at home.
I think you do well. But I think just going back to the point Rachel made as well, about that, it's a balance between it feeling like it's Big Brother watching you and social interaction. I think people are now wanting that social interaction but feel comfortable with it. I think it sounds like a really good idea for something to do. And one of the first people who went to quarantine, we had someone in our team in Nottingham who was in Italy when COVID broke, and we managed to get them back, but they had to go into quarantine before we got into lockdown when everyone was still in the office. And it was a very strange situation. We delivered his computer, left on the doorstep, but also then with his iPad, he was on FaceTime for the whole day, exactly as you're saying. The team was sitting 4 people at desk with 1 person on the screen. And I only just realized when you said it, there was a kind of novelty factor to that, because, he's still here. But he felt, when quarantine was completely unusual and he felt totally isolated from the entire country, that's how he felt integrated, because he could see people and hear people talking and so forth. And actually, it's exactly that thing now where we've got to think, exactly as you're saying, in that different way. And I don't think people will see as Big Brother watching them. I think people, as you say, Ben, want to see and be seen and see, I'm working late tonight. I want the credit and the brownie points for the fact they'll work late to get the drawings finished.
Yeah. But you know what? If sometimes someone wants to duck out, because it's like me, I might disappear for a few hours a day because I want to read something and I don't want anybody to disturb me. Not everyone's there all the time. So it's not Big Brother. It's a matter of, right, okay, between 9 and 12, 3 days a week, everyone's on, because we're going to be able to share stuff. And at other times you can elect whether you come in or not, so it is adapting, and it's like I said, there's a whole group of people coming through who are younger, who work in a completely different way to how I work, you know, and we've just got to change how we work.
I don't think
it's changed forever.
There is a bit of a disparity or difference even in the guys that are working, and it's usually the junior guys in a production role compared to a management role. A management role is very easy to be fluid and be anywhere and just be on your laptop, on your phone. But if you're, particularly in our business, if you're just producing drawings all day, you probably do want to be in the office where you've got a fast computer and 2 big screens and there's someone there to ask questions of.
Well,
very
maybe,
much so for us,
not.
Jacob. That's exactly what we find, and it's the knowledge sharing as well. But yeah, it's interesting hearing what Rachel's saying. Having a sort of knowledge sharing pool hour every day would, yes, that's.
I mean, it doesn't substitute for us all being together in an office, but we've got to look at some way of how do we mentor those people who are already in the business and they're sort of just struggling because they're just too isolated and they're just. And some people haven't got that get up and go.
New people, you know, what's going to happen if this goes on for 2 years, 3 years, and we've got a gap of 3 years with no trainees, no apprentices coming into the industry. You know, the skills gap to our industry is going to be horrendous.
We already had that in 2008. I mean, I was just leaving university at the time, so I saw it really at the sharp end of everyone losing jobs, and there's now a lot of people of my generation that should have been architects or designers that had to go into another industry because there weren't jobs.
Definitely.
But
Fred,
but
I realise you haven't said anything.
Sorry, go on.
So go on, Rachel.
But surely they're also, I mean, the way I look at, I mean, I'm not at all flippant towards COVID, but I come into the office and we work together, and initially it was like, right, you know, we'd put something on a desk and somebody would put it down and somebody else would pick it up. Now we actually go about the office in a little bit more of a pragmatic way. And therefore, I'm sure that in terms of a bit like children going back to school, you know, they're saying that if you're vulnerable, you don't go back into school as a teacher. And therefore, it may well be that in offices, if you've got trainees that are coming through, there are people in offices who are seen as more vulnerable, but there's a load of people who can actually go in. And therefore, if you've got juniors coming through, or people who need to be trained, there are people who can actually go and train and they're not concerned about being in the office. And I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who are, do you know what, let's just get on with it. So if we've got to recruit and we've got to go in and train, as long as you know that people are being sensible and you trust your employees that they're actually going about the things that they are meant to be going about, to me, you've also got to get a little bit of pragmatism introduced back into how we work. So you can actually do things. And if people want jobs and people want to keep on working in the way they want to work, you do things in a way which means that you can actually have people in offices.
Yeah, and Fred, I was just going to come to you just so that obviously we've not kind of funny questions to you. Obviously from Curry & Brown's perspective, where are you at in terms of kind of office and the impact you're seeing on projects?
Well, in terms of Curry & Brown ourselves, we are just started going back. I think we've had 3 visits to the office now. So we're going in 1 day a week, which is I think roughly about 20% of staff at once. I think sort of circa 7th of September, they're looking to up that to about 2 days a week, and then we'll go and see how it goes. Just completely echo the other comments, really. I think the junior members of staff are suffering really from interaction, you know, living with their parents, you know, not seeing their mates as much, suffering on the training side. So yeah, definitely, I think the senior guys can get on well enough. We've all learned to use, you know, technology a lot better than we ever did before. We're all a lot more comfortable with that. So that's a positive side, certainly. But in terms of the actual project, looking at a couple of office feasibilities now, and again, you know, all the things that have been talked about certainly are being discussed at a very early stage. So office density, openable windows, lots of cycle provision, changing facilities, etc. So people are really thinking about that a lot. And then in terms of M&E, obviously you're getting, you know, a lot more fresh air into the building through office, through the windows and so on. So does that impact on filtration and air quality and increased maintenance costs, etc.? So there's, yeah, lots to think about. So we're not quite there with the answers yet as such, but yeah, we're working through them at the moment.
I think that's going to be the case for lots of people. It's a great way of describing it. Is there's no hard and fast rules yet, but we're all just kind of getting on with it and making do. I think that's probably a good point to stop. I know lots of people are ducking out now because they've got 11 o'clock meetings, and I realise I don't want to waste everyone's day talking about this.
Mark Innes from Cushman and Wakefield has said he was obviously on, and then going back to Rachel's point, he lost his internet connection, and he's been WhatsApping me going, "I'm trying to get back in, but I can't." So there's a good example. He's missed out on the conversation. So Cushman and Wakefield don't get our intel today.
Well, after the call or after the conversation, I will be kind of collating everyone's comments, and we'll also be putting a recording of this presentation, guest workshop chat on our YouTube channels for everyone to see and look back or share as you please. But thank you all so much for taking part in your comments. It's been really interesting. This is, I guess, one of the earlier versions of this series of talks. We will be doing another one every month. A little plug. The next one is about using schools as an anchor to a mixed-use development. Something that we at Leonard Design and Ben think of quite a lot, or think I have quite strong views on. So we'll be discussing that and its benefits to those kind of developments. So kind of keep a lookout for our marketing information and sign on if you've got the time. But thank you all very much for your time.
Thank you very much.
And I think also, if people give us feedback, I guess, this is a new format for us. So I think if there is feedback, good or bad, please let us know, because we want to keep developing this, don't we, Jay? But, and it is a new way of doing it, getting people to kind of get together and have the conversations. So any feedbacks or comments you've got, please feed back through Jay, because we want to kind of keep changing, adapting it and getting the thing to work as well as we can.
Super. Thanks, John. Thanks, everyone.
Superb.
Right.
Great. See you all. Have a great day.
Cheers.
Cheers. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Bye.
See you soon. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.